Lieutenant, is there a 6-foot bat in Gotham City? Every punk in this town is scared stiff. You know what they say? They say he can't be killed.
When you freak terrorizes, wait till they get a load of me. Nice outfit.
Shields up. Careful.
Doesn't get those wonderful toys. Ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?
With a new secret ingredient!
Smiling.
He stole my balloons! Why didn't somebody tell me that he had one of those things?
Shall we dance?
Wouldn't hit a guy with glasses on, would you? Huh?
What are you? I'm Batman.
"1989 was a big year for cinema, with the majority of the films being released were sequels, with critics coining the phrase sequelitis. We saw Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2, Elm Street Part 5, Karate Kid Part 3, Back to the Future Part 2, Friday the 13th Part 8, Star Trek 5 and Indiana Jones would go on his third adventure on the big screen. But one movie had everyone excited, and that was Tim Burton's Batman, starring Michael Keaton as the Dark Knight, which was highly controversial casting, but once the teaser was released, all those worries were put to rest, and it made a killing at the box office. The film had a unique marketing campaign that took full advantage of every avenue to grab people's attention. It was the summer of Batman, and the Caped Crusader arrived on store shelves in the form of action figures, model kits, trading cards, stickers, posters, clothes, food, and of course, video games. As Batman wasn't a family-friendly movie, it was taking inspiration from Frank Miller's darker interpretation of the Caped Crusader from the 80s. The producers and certainly the director Tim Burton were trying to move away from the campy Adam West TV show from the 60s. It would be given a 12 rating in UK cinemas, making the debut of the 12 certificate, but when it came to home video, it would get a 15. So for many young kids like myself, we had to wait a bit longer to see it, so the only avenue for me, and I'm sure for many others, was to enjoy this new Batman film was by getting the toys and of course playing the video games. Ocean Software back in 1989 was well known at this point in the gaming world for producing licensed video games, and garnered loads of praise and success for their recent game on RoboCop, which I explored last year in a retrospective, and they aim to follow its success with Batman. Ocean's head of development Gary Bracey already had a working relationship with Warner Brothers after acquiring the rights to produce a text-adventure game on the Neverending Story. This time round, Ocean would have far more access to Batman compared to their experience with Orion Pictures with RoboCop, but the cost of licensing Batman was over $1 million, far more than what they had paid for RoboCop, as studios were now catching on to the profits to be made from video games. The staff at Ocean were given the opportunity to visit the backlot at Pinewood Studios, so they could take photos of the impressive set of Gotham City designed by Anton Furst to use as reference, and were given a presentation on the marketing strategy for the film by Warner Brothers. The staff working on the game were given copies of the storyboards and the script to help them figure out how the game would be structured. The team did eventually get to see the film and were flown out once it opened in America for a screening in New York, as the film came out 2 months before the UK and the game wouldn't get released until later in the year to take advantage of the run-up to Christmas. Mike Lamb would take on the coding duties on the ZX Spectrum, and he would be credited with coding the Amstrad, Amiga and Atari ST versions. The heads at Ocean wanted to combine the arcade action of RoboCop with the driving simulation of Chase HQ, so the player could use the Batmobile and Batwing. The encounter with Jack Napier at Access Chemicals was the ideal choice to kickstart the game. Level 2 has you control the Batmobile as you escape from the Joker with Vicky Vale, mimicking the driving section of Chase HQ. This would be exclusive to the Amiga, Atari ST and later conversion to the MS-DOS. The 8-bit micro home versions would be isometric. Level 3 would be a puzzle to find the toxic ingredients to the Joker's products. Level 4 you have to remove the Joker's poisonous balloons with the Batwing. Again the same style of gameplay from Level 2. And the final stage you work your way up the cathedral to defeat the Joker, returning to the gameplay of Level 1, where this time you have extra obstacles such as spikes, the floor breaking and rats to avoid, which was a massive pain for some gamers.
What? What? What killed me?
Artist Bill Harbison, whose duties was to work on the Amiga/Atari ST versions, had to provide the art for the driving sections and the cutscenes, which would feature more heavily in the Atari ST version between levels. Bill was struggling to replicate the Batmobile faithfully in the computer, as he only had a few press images of Batman posing with the car, with most facing from the front. Luckily, toy companies were starting to put out models of the Batmobile, and he managed to grab one from a comic book shop to fine-tune the details on the car for the Amiga and Atari ST. Once the game was finished for all the platforms, from the ZX Spectrum to the Amiga, the gaming press went crazy for it. The reviews were high across the board. Ocean had once again managed to find the right balance of gameplay to offer enough variety, and produced a game that really captured the visual style of the film, more so than Robocop. But it didn't match the sales of Robo, but it was deemed a big success, especially for the Amiga. David Pleasance, the managing director of Commodore UK, had the bright idea of a software bundle that also included a copy of the Batman game with an Amiga 500. It was called the Batman Pack and retailed for £399. David approached Ocean for exclusive rights to the Amiga version of the game for 2 months, but was met with resistance as Ocean stated their dealers would get very upset. But David stuck to his guns and promised Ocean a royalty payment for each pack sold, placing an initial order of 10,000. The end result far exceeded both Ocean and Commodore's expectations. Over 186,000 units of the Batman pack were sold during the next year, creating large profits for Ocean and Commodore. On the YouTube channel The Ocean Experience, which archives a number of Ocean-related videos from back in the day, the staff at the studio were messing around and tried to guess what game would be #1 for Christmas that year.
Have you got a computer? Yeah. What do you think #1's gonna be then? JSH. No, Batman. JSH. No, Batman. No, it's Batman. JSH. No, Batman.
Ocean Software wasn't the only video game developer to get their hands on the Batman license. For consoles, the Japanese company Sunsoft produced games for the NES, Sega Mega Drive, PC Engine and the Game Boy. The NES version was intended to arrive for Christmas 1989, but was delayed by a month due to changes needed to the cutscenes. Nintendo Power had covered the game in a preview, and the cutscenes were very different to the final result. The artists had taken inspiration from The Killing Joke, and they didn't really follow the film, with one moment where Batman asks where Vicky Vale is and the thug says, "Gotham City," and Batman questions what he says, like he doesn't really know about Gotham City. So it appears the artists didn't know much about Batman, and the Joker wasn't going to be the end boss. So further refinements were made, with changes to the cutscenes to follow the film and include the Joker as the final boss. The game, once released, would sell over 1 million copies and became a firm favourite for NES owners. The Sega Mega Drive port would oddly have a staggered release hitting Japan in 1990 and wouldn't make it to the UK until the summer of 1992, though most UK magazines had already reviewed the US import of the game the year before. The PC Engine game would only be released in Japan and would never make it to the USA for the TurboGrafx 16. Originally, the game was going to be a typical platformer and was previewed in September 1989 in the Japanese magazine Famitsu, but for some reason Sunsoft changed the game entirely. Batman would also turn up in the arcades, which would be published by Atari and developed by New Team. It arrived in arcades in 1991, despite the title screen on the game listing 1990 as its release. It didn't get much traction in the arcades due to not many arcade PCB boards being produced, and was barely covered in the gaming magazines. So now I'm going to explore each version of the game released and address some of the pros and cons, and point out which version presents a true adaptation of the film. First up is the ZX Spectrum, which is already a strong contender. The Spectrum was known for providing limited colours on screen, but is surprisingly very detailed with each of its levels. The scrolling is very smooth as Batman uses his back grapple to climb up in the game and exhibits no slowdown. Batman is quite speedy as he manoeuvres around the screen on the first and last level. When you finish off the Joker at the Cathedral, you see the Joker fall all the way down. It shows you the full height of the level in all its glory. Extremely impressive for this old hardware, even at the time. The driving sections take on the isometric view as highlighted earlier, and is easy to control as you avoid traffic to make sharp turns to escape the Joker's goons. As you make the final run of the stage, the background changes to a long stretch of road. It's just like in the film as the road becomes empty as you enter the Batcave to complete the level. The Amstrad would often get lumped with lazy ports of Spectrum games, with programmers often ignoring the benefits of the computer's hardware, but thankfully Batman on the old CPC is treated to its own version, and feels closer to the Amiga game with its platform levels, and the advantage of having extra colour does have the benefit of capturing the movie quite well. The game would also be released on cartridge for Amstrad's failed console, the GX4000, making it one of the best games for the console's limited lineup of titles, though the game didn't have any improvements on the graphics front when it hit cartridge. The driving sections appear mostly identical to its Spectrum counterpart, though looking a bit more blocky. The bottom screen, which highlights Batman's health bar, points and available lives, is not as detailed as the Spectrum, with Batman looking a bit like Adam West. The Commodore 64 game features an awesome loading screen featuring the artwork of the comic adaptation. The C64 game would be the easiest of the bunch, down to the fact that it has less enemies to deal with and no rats on the final stage. Mike Lamb wouldn't code this version, that was handed to Zach Townsend. The sprite of Batman for me looks the best out of the bunch on Ocean's games. Despite being smaller, the graphic artist clearly spent the most time on him and little on the enemies, who are very basic in their appearance and lack any detail, especially when you stop the Joker on the last stage. It all looks very rushed, and you don't see him fall all the way down from the cathedral, as it just cuts to him hitting the ground. Batman's health status has now moved to the top of the screen, and lacks the detail of the others, which take on the appearance of his utility belt. Controlling Batman is identical to the other micro versions, but as he jumps down from a platform, he falls at a very slow pace, which doesn't happen in the other versions. The isometric levels do lack the detail of the Spectrum version, but you are given a wider playing field to see what's going on. Unlike the Spectrum and Amstrad counterparts, you get to drive to the Batcave. The music is nicely composed and takes advantage of the C64's famous sound chip. This game is a big step up over Ocean's previous efforts on Robocop, which they released unfinished on the C64. The 16-bit computer ports would be the most enticing to gamers due to the visual upgrade and 3D style driving sections, which looked very impressive back in 1989. The Amiga and Atari ST versions, as you come to expect, showcase stronger visuals and music. The game even throws in sound samples from the film, but the improvements aren't a major leap, especially considering the hardware inside these 16-bit computers. The driving and flying sections are easily the standout levels. They were always pushed with the advertising, but playing them was often a frustrating experience. Using a joystick to steer, accelerate and brake wasn't a lot of fun, and required some careful timing, but the platforming levels play very much like their 8-bit micro versions, but are a lot tougher, with many bad guys on screen with annoying moments of the enemies throwing grenades at you from above, making it a bit of a challenge to avoid being hit. The chemical plant is a bit of a maze, with a number of directions to take to face up against Jack Napier. Throughout the majority of the ports, Batman's grapple gun appears to fire out of his crotch, and his projectiles in these 16-bit versions look like bumblebees. The Atari ST computer was known for not being as powerful as the Amiga, but it would appear pretty much identical to the Amiga game on the graphics front, and it would have some extra bits with artwork between each stage to help tell the story. No idea why the Amiga version doesn't have these. The Atari ST version doesn't allow you to play the game with sound effects and music, it only gives you the option to toggle between the two. The game would also get ported to the MS-DOS PC by Astros. Visually it's similar to the Atari ST, as it includes the artwork between each stage, but it would have changes made to the Batman utility belt, showing his energy as Batman's face turns to the Joker's the more damage he takes on, appearing black and white and lacking colour compared to the other Ocean ports. The game has no music and the sound effects are very basic. The frame rate throughout is a bit jerky, it lacks the smooth scrolling of the Amiga and Atari ST, and come the final stage when you kill off the Joker, as you fire your bat grapple to hit him off the helicopter ladder, you don't see him fall to his death. So when it comes to the console versions, which were titled Batman the Video Game, the NES version came with impressive graphics and music. In terms of being faithful to the movie, it takes a lot of liberties with the presentation and enemies Batman faces off against. It does feel like it was another video game and they changed the assets because the levels don't really capture the movie. The first, second and last level seem more in line with the film, but others you have levels in the sewers and in a cave. But that doesn't distract from the gameplay, which is pretty addictive and hard. But once you've memorised the patterns of the enemies and the boss characters, you should be able to complete it without pulling too much of your hair out, as the game ends with a tough encounter with the Joker. Batman moves around like a ninja, bouncing off the walls like Ninja Gaiden, and it's very satisfying hitting the right spot to make your way up the level, but does require some precision and stressful timing on the last level, as it becomes tough to make your way up the cathedral. Batman comes with an array of weapons to take out his enemies to avoid close combat. Sadly, Sunsoft avoided having levels dedicated to the Batmobile and Batwing, and only showcased them in the cutscenes. Talking of the cutscenes, they are really impressive, adding a great cinematic slice to the game. The music, like the Ocean games, don't rely on the music by Danny Elfman, as Sunsoft composed their own themes, which are extremely catchy, and one of the strongest parts of the game, and people still talk about it positively in the retro gaming scene. The PC Engine game was the oddest version released, which is a top-down game, as you have Batman walk around collecting items, stunning the Joker's goons who respawn, so no killing in this game. Some levels you find yourself cleaning paintings, as Batman removes the graffiti in the gallery. This was a very odd decision for the programmers to take, as it seems closer to Pac-Man or say Bomberman. You pick up power-ups along the way to move faster, and you can throw multiple batarangs, but if you lose these items then it becomes very difficult on the later stages. The cutscenes are superb and they are deployed throughout the game to make it more cinematic, and these are easily the most impressive out of all the games released. I'm sure owners of this console must have been excited to hear Batman was coming out, and may have expected a beefed up version of the NES game perhaps, but instead got this strange version. It's not a bad game at all, but it does get a bit boring about half an hour into it, as there is way too many stages to each level and it begins to get very repetitive. The last level you get to face up against a number of boss characters before you face the Joker, and it stays very close to the film, especially with the guy jumping at you and falling through the floor. The music is pretty much identical to the NES game and sounds even better in places, but the change of gameplay left a bit of a sour taste in the mouth of fans who played it expecting something far more action-packed, especially from a game featuring Batman. It was clear Sunsoft was aiming this solely at children. For the handheld Game Boy, Batman would be shrunken down to a tiny sprite as he leaps around the stages using his back grapple tool as a gun. The game has 4 stages, with a number of them having 3 levels before you can make it onto the next stage. The game incorporates detailed cutscenes, though they appear a bit jumbled up near the end, as you control the Batwing before Joker hijacks Gotham City's 200th year celebration. Your encounter with Jack Napier is not a simple one-hit kill that sends him into the chemicals, but instead is a boss fight. Stage 2, you find yourself in the gallery, and then you escape in the Batmobile. But there is no driving section, as come stage 3 you're in the Batwing, skipping the Batmobile entirely. Stage 4 you find yourself in the cathedral, and you have to complete 2 levels before you face up against a Joker, in a similar battle to the boss fight on stage 1. This game also has some great music, and sounds very good on the Game Boy. It's a fun little platformer that seems more in the style of Super Mario, as you jump around on moving platforms and discover hidden items in the scenery. The Game Boy game proved very popular with kids, who picked it up in 1990 when they got their Game Boy for Christmas of 1989. The Mega Drive version isn't a straight port of the NES game, though it does take the music and retunes it for the Mega Drive. It provides a new take with visuals looking closer to the film and is a lot easier to play, and its levels seem more in line with Ocean Software's take on the film, with a mix-up of platforming with driving and flying segments. Batman feels a bit stiff to control compared to the ninja-style acrobatics of the NES game, but instead of looking purple, he looks just like his movie counterpart and makes a great introduction to each stage as he swoops down in classic Batman fashion. This version I played a lot during the early 90s when I got my hands on the Mega Drive, and it still holds up well today. The jumping is a little frustrating in how you time your double jump, but you can use it as an attack if well timed, though it doesn't do much damage. You do have to get very close to take out the enemies when you're out of batarangs, so without his weapons he has very little range, and you have to be very precise with your attacks. Using his back grapple tool is very satisfying as it locks onto another platform and fires you upwards. The boss battles aren't too difficult, and they try to incorporate the Joker's henchmen instead of battling robots, for example. The cathedral level does recycle the bosses, which is pretty annoying. They do that in games to artificially extend it. Fighting the Joker can be tough, just like the NES version, but you can easily get him with a well-paced jump attack. It does take longer to do damage to him, but it's an easy technique once you've got the rhythm. When it comes to the game with the most impressive graphics, the arcade version takes that award, which you come to expect with arcade hardware. The game incorporates digital stills from the film and audio to take you through the game's story, and it makes use of Danny Elfman's score. The arcade game does offer more stages, but some are relatively short. The game itself can be completed in under 20 minutes. You start out beating up thugs in Gotham City, with an early appearance on the Batmobile as you make your way to Axis Chemicals. After defeating the Joker, you find yourself in the gallery. As you escape from the Joker, you are back in the car, then face up against some more Joker's henchmen like in the film. Then we jump into the Batwing to cut the Joker's balloons, and then we make up our way to the cathedral to finally defeat the Joker. This is all starting to sound very familiar. With all arcade titles, they are designed to eat up your loose change, so the game ramps up its difficulty after the first level. It throws so many bad guys on screen to eat up your lives. The gallery section is a pretty lengthy level and very tough to get through, making it a challenge to do without losing a credit. Despite the strong visuals, it is a bit of a clunky game. It exhibits bits of slowdown, frame rate issues, as the scrolling isn't particularly smooth, and controlling Batman results in stiff gameplay, and the sprite of Batman, despite appearing quite detailed, is animated in a somewhat goofy way. His standing and flying kicks look silly, and jumping up and down with his Batcape out in full display doesn't look great. The sprite lacks a level of coolness and threat that is depicted in the film. In summary, it doesn't matter what computer or console you had back in the day, as Batman was pretty solid on all of them. They all have their quirks that make them slightly inferior to the other, or others sacrifice being totally true to the movie in favour of more exciting gameplay, especially with Sunsoft's approach, which was more being inspired than being totally faithful to the film. Atari's approach was a good effort, but it was all style over substance. It looks nice but isn't as fun to play. For me personally, I think Ocean's approach to translating the film into a video game was the most successful. They captured the visual style and spirit of the movie. You got a greater sense you're experiencing the live action movie as a video game, but the gameplay wasn't perfect. Like many old school games, especially British developed ones, they were very frustrating and unbalanced. Less checks were done back then to iron out any gameplay issues. The player would often have to figure out the best way to get to the next stage through trial and error. Just like its arcade counterpart, these Ocean Software versions of Batman were very short. If you got very good at the game, you could complete it in about 25 minutes or so on the Amiga, and probably less time on the 8-bit microcomputers, such as the Spectrum. For the gameplay, Sunsoft, being a Japanese company, takes the position of offering the best gameplay. The Nintendo and Mega Drive releases are a lot of fun, and I found myself returning to these games more so than the computer versions, which aren't as easy to pick up and play for short bursts to kill some time. The PC Engine version, though fun for a quick game, is the longest version released and could take you over an hour to complete it, but it doesn't offer enough to make you want to persist to the very end. During this period for Ocean Software and Sunsoft, they were at the top of their game, but they didn't seem to maintain their quality of output come the 90s. Sunsoft didn't seem to find much success come the 16-bit era, and its US offices shut down come 1995. But for Batman, he seemed to do well for his early appearances during the 8-bit and 16-bit generation, and throughout the years he has fared far better in the gaming world compared to fellow DC Comics superhero Superman. Come 1992, Batman Returns would have slightly fewer games released across the gaming platforms, and most didn't live up to expectations, which I'll explore in a future video. Most licensed games were seen as cheap cash-ins. The movie name and cover design would entice you to buy it, and you end up with a rushed game that bore little resemblance to what the game promised, or what the advertising sold you on. Ocean was no stranger to this, but the quality of their games were improving, and come the late 80s the idea of licensed video games wasn't seen as a bad thing, and Batman proved that. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and click the bell to be notified of my latest retrospectives and reviews. Big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain early access to my content and exclusive videos, then follow the link below.